With this, let's begin with panel discussion. Panel discussion on mapping skill gaps and competency levels to the organizational goals, creating business-ready workforce. Can I please request my panelists to join me on stage? I invite Mr. Prashant Bhatnagar, Director, Hiring and Staffing, Sapien Nitro. Can I please have the gentleman on stage with us? Everyone, please welcome the gentleman on stage. Can I please have Mr. Jayant Krishna, Principal Consultant, TCS? Can I please have Shashikant SS, COO, Centum Work Skills India Limited? Can I please have Shashikant SS, COO, Centum Work Skills India Limited? Can I please have Mr. Rajiv Bhadoria, Director Group HR, Jindal Steel and Power? A very warm welcome. Everyone, please welcome the panelists on stage. And to moderate this session, we have once again E. Jayashree Kurup, Head Content and Research, Times Job.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming in for our second panel discussion. In the morning, we kind of talked about how the entire role of HR is changing, how we are, the way we recruit, the way we engage the workforce is changing. Today, we're talking about skills, a big problem in the Indian workforce. Hi, Jen, do join us. We're talking about how skills and competencies, one, they're changing at breakneck speed, and two, your organization needs competencies and skills, and getting the right workforce to connect with them is the biggest challenge that many organizations are facing. The last 2 years we've had a slowdown, definitely a slowdown, a good time for us to introspect, think about how the skills gaps have been and how to address them. Today, we are facing a situation where hopefully India will be back on track, India will be growing at breakneck speed, and what really happens is at that time, many of the, if you've laid the ground rules, you tend to do it well. Otherwise, what happens is 2006 to 2008, we saw death of ethics. You were poaching mindlessly, you were offering salaries because you had a job to complete. We can reach that stage. But have we used these 2 years to actually be ready with our employees? Have we multi-skilled them so that as we get more and more diverse work, we are able to kind of meet our requirements, and have we engaged that larger talent pool out there so that maybe they haven't become part of my pipeline, but it is out there and I have actually identified them. This is probably a good place to allow our panelists to set the tone. Prashant, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Jayashree. As I was reflecting on the skill gaps, I noticed we have gaps of many nature, including gender. So thank you for bringing diversity to the panel. We would have been otherwise short on many gaps as well. So I'd like to think of it on two levels. One is there are roles which perhaps an organization will require for the future, which we can predict, where there is some visibility of what that would look like. And at least in my industry, there are perhaps a large set of roles that we don't know what we will need for tomorrow. I can't speak for it, but at least my industry is certainly grappling with that problem. So in situations like this, when you have to provide skills, competency levels for roles that don't exist, how do you start? Where do you start? should you even attempt to start? So we think of it at two levels. We think of it at roles where there is some predictability of them remaining true, remaining alive in the future. And there are roles which are yet being written, for which it is difficult for us to have those competencies and skills defined today. And therefore, what we'd like to believe is we look for people which are able to live in that environment of ambiguity. We're looking for people or those competencies where you can live and define them on the go, and also redefine them. So I'll give you a small example just to put that in context. A lot of the roles, when you start with defining them, you think of them in the way they are. So kind of being an agency, we look at roles like copywriters. But instead of a copywriter, we now think of the roles where your responsibility is, for example, to have Rahul fall in love with Reema. That's the role definition as a copywriter. And if you think of that as a role definition, everything else around starts revolving. So in the context of what lies ahead, we believe there are roles which are predictable to some degree, but a large set of the roles aren't predictable. So instead of trying to create everything, start with what you know and then build upon it along the way.
Okay. Shashikant, you're talking about a constantly moving job role, so to speak. How does the candidate and the line managers fall in line with that new paradigm?
Yeah, I'll just introduce this topic in a slightly elaborate manner and try and see how much less time I can take. Bridging gaps, skill gaps, actually we need an ecosystem in this country to actually take this forward. So thankfully in the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen the government of India actually coming forward with a National Skills Development Corporation, which is essentially a body to actually enable the whole ecosystem to function. Now, and therefore my perspective will be a kind of a bridge between the candidate who is sitting outside and the organization who actually waiting to absorb a lot of skilled and pre-skilled people. See, today the jobs are, therefore one of the first steps that the ecosystem has put in place, or starting to put in place, is formation of sector skills councils, and therefore laying down occupation standards for a particular role. So therefore that part of the job is already started off in this country. UK took about 108 years, 110 years. Germany is about 400 years old. We are just about 5 to 8 years old in this whole place. So therefore there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Now coming to the specific point, training providers like us are on constant trying to look at what new skills that the organizations actually want in their people who are coming into this, into their system. And therefore there is always an industry collaboration that keeps happening at every stage of our journey in terms of trying to get people capable enough to enter the various organization systems. So while the target is moving as what Jayashree said, there are certain skills which are uniformly required across the roles. So that, to my mind, is what is called the base level of the datum that we need to create. And that skills can be actually provided outside the organization as a pre-skill.
Would you like to articulate that as well?
See, for example, if you look at, say, knowledge of little bit of arithmetic, whether he's a sales guy or a service guy, there's something of an arithmetic that he needs to know. Maybe 8th class arithmetic or 9th class arithmetic. He needs to know a little bit of English because he has to talk English, because today that still a little bit of English still helps him to actually grow socially up in terms of his esteem. Then he would want interaction, human interaction skills, be it sales or be it service or be it any function in terms of the shop floor or wherever he is there. He needs interaction skills. So that's the third one. He needs life skills. The guy, he has to grapple with his life when he comes into larger metros and where the jobs are created. He needs a lot of skills where he has to grapple with his life. And therefore, an element of finance understanding. What is the money? How much can he save? Where can he put his money? Is there a small little PF? Is there a small little PPF? Can he send his money, some of the money back home? Right? So adjusting to life, a little bit of finance, arithmetic, customer interaction, human interaction skills, life skills are very, very important for him. And these are commonly required across all the roles, whatever the organization is, and at whichever role they actually, whichever level they take in people. From there we can actually build domain specific skills to an extent outside, but large part of it is actually built within the organization where the person, he or she would actually enter into. So that bridge between the organization and the candidate with what we provide as a service provider is actually is in two stage, if you ask me, a two-tier structure. Some outside, large inside.
Okay.
So unless this collaboration works like a beautiful marriage, we will not be able to overcome this gap if that doesn't happen.
Jayant, he talked about the skills, the basic skills that every candidate needs, and then you have the competencies, the skills and the competencies. Would you like to articulate how that has become a challenge in a constantly moving environment?
Yeah, I'll take that as Jayashree, but before that, allow me to digress a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and look at what kind of course correction is happening in the skills sector.
Sure.
You know, at the macro level, you know, through a prism of timelessness, private sector keeps blaming the government that this doesn't happen. Government says that private sector doesn't do enough. You know,
Yeah.
so how could there be a meeting of the minds? He did talk about you know, the sector skill councils and things like that. See, the entire initiative started, the entire seriousness about skilling happened in the country a few years back when the late C.K. Prahalad, under India at 75 mission, you know, he evangelized as to what kind of country we like to see when independent India becomes 75-year-old. And he said, among other things, we'll need 500 million skilled people. Now, nobody knows where that 500 million figure came from, but the fact is, it was an aspirational figure looking at some macroeconomic trends and the fact that the economy was growing at 9% per annum at that point of time, you know. So, so that seriousness started, but before that, you know, we only looked at BTechs, MBAs, ITIs, and polytechnics. Nothing beyond these four buckets when it came to skilling, you know. So, see, today what is happening is, look at the capacity vis-a-vis this 500 million. You know, today in the country we have a capacity to skill about 50 lakh people per annum. You know, 5 million per annum. You know, and out of a total workforce of about 48 crore, including labor class, you know, you know, barely 5% of them have undergone any formal education, and another 5% would have, you know, they have become skilled on the job. You know, they didn't have any formal education. So if you take aside, you know, keep aside these things, you know, and look at the today's capacity, we are going to take almost 90 more years to create this kind of a work. You know, so where would the demographic dividend come? You know, there'll be acts of terrorism. You know, there'll be those kind of forces which will be operating. You know, because you know you are making, there's a complete disconnect today. You know, between what government does and what the private sector does. So I think to address that, one very, very important thing which has happened at the Government of India level with a lot of collaboration with the private sector is that, you know, this National Skills Qualification Framework has come. So that the children or youth, they do not look at, you know, that if they have to skill themselves, that's the end of the road. Today, skilling is not aspirational. Beyond a BTech and MBA or some of the professional courses, skilling is not aspirational in the country. I mean, we are to be blamed. We have not attached enough premium to skilling in this country. I'm focusing because bulk of the numbers will come from people at the bottom of the pyramid, not this creamy layer of skills, because those numbers are few and far between, you know. So I think it's very, very important to give them vertical mobility in the skilling space, as well as horizontal mobility, so that any point of time they want to you know, move from skilling space to the mainstream education, they could do that. This National Skills Qualification has identified 10 levels, much like what other countries have done, and that has just become a law. And I think, you know, the industry has to start embracing. See, the problem is in this country, industry pays lip service, and we have become, you know, my day job is also for TCS, you know, and we have become non-believers that nothing that government is doing will work. But, you know, how will it happen? So I think another thing, you know, which, you know, was talked about, that, you know, the sector skill councils are essentially, but before that, let me also say that, you know, industry used to say that whatever All India Council of Technical Education or NCVT, whatever courses they mandate has no relevance whatsoever with what in the industry needs, you know. So there was no meeting of the minds. So therefore, these sector skill councils are in the process of being set up. Some of them have been set up, and idea is to come up with national occupational standards and qualification packs. And the courseware and the curriculum will be derived out of these packs for each key job role for each of the verticals. And these will now onwards be defined by private sector, by industry, which is largely private sector, you know, and now that's how that course correction will happen.
When do you expect this to
See, it has, you know, you know, if you look at countries like Switzerland, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, where, you know, skilling happens in a very, very serious manner. You know, those countries have taken almost more than 2 decades or maybe perhaps 3 decades to mature this model. You know, our journey started barely 3, 4, at best 5 years ago.
Shouldn't we leapfrog?
So we must leapfrog, I think, and therefore this is such a huge space that the more you do, the more seems to remain to be done. You know, this is the largest HR intervention ever seen on this earth in the history of mankind.
Right.
No country has ever done it, ever, you know, kind of a thing. Right. Such is the enormity of the task, and therefore the more you do, the more seems to remain to be done.
Right.
You know.
Rajiv, let's take the employees and the employers. Today you see which starts first. The employee is aspirational, the employee wants to grow, skill himself, make himself relevant constantly, himself, herself relevant, gender equality. But what about the employer? How much comes from the employer? How much comes from the employee? And are we do we need to fix at the educational level? Do we need to fix at the level of ongoing education as well?
See, Jayashree, here I would say the golden rule is that there are no golden rules.
Yeah.
And let's start with that basic premise, because this is like Virendra was talking about,
Yeah.
you know, the continual change
Yeah.
and the future that has already arrived.
Yeah.
It's kind of a change and a continual change process that is affecting us. So that probably sets the context of the current working environment, wherein the skills and the competencies are getting not only defined, redefined, learnt, unlearned, relearnt, and so on and so forth. The background is last 10 to 12 years what's happened around the globe, not only in India. And so that is something I'll just digress for a minute to kind of, you know, capture that context, which is actually build the current context and what's going to build the future from sublime to ridiculous. I mean, the range is very wide. It all started 1998, if we see. In fact, the business driver was globalization, and that brought in a lot of, you know, furore in the business arena. And the technology driver was the Y2K bug. The Y2K bug was overcome, and by overcoming, we created an overkill of technology. And that's what we are facing. The repercussions of that we are facing today. The overkill of technology was in terms of internet being given as a tool to communicate globally. We also had the ERPs, which could help you manage your resources globally. The SAP, the kind of PeopleSoft and so on and so forth, JD Edwards, which are still state-of-the-art technologies. But they look static and sterile when compared to the dynamic nature of the BPPs, the business performance platforms which are emerging. Side by side, what happened, the Lehman Brothers occurred. Because of this, probably they didn't register the change. And the fact that the business driver had changed, and they continue to align themselves to the old ways of looking at things. As under competency mapping and skill mapping, you have those success profiles. Now, what worked in the past need not necessarily work, and they never changed. They thought the world is always going to be northwards. It didn't happen that way. There was total commercial insanity because of this lack of understanding, and there was a difference of opinion, or probably they didn't understand the difference what was prime and what was subprime, and therefore the recession occurred. Now, post-Lehman world is a very different world, and carved out of what has happened in just about last 10 to 12 years. I mean, internet is not more than 12 to 13, 14 years old in a commercially utilized sense globally. And we are living, therefore, in a change environment where the business context or the business driver is continual change itself. Which means change is not taking place over a period of time anymore, but as you rightly said, at every given point of time. So there is a tangent at every given point of time. So the kind of complexity, the magnitude of change and the complexity of change is becoming absolutely humongous. Now this gives the context of what is there in future to come. So linear extrapolation, probably in this context, what we are doing in India currently, as rightly said, is something phenomenal, which we have to achieve by 2020 or 2025, when we actually start getting that, the dividend, the social dividend, or whatever you say, the population dividend in the context of a global scenario. We'll have to redefine the paradigm shifts that are going to take place, linear extrapolation having died its death. Paradigm shifts is something which is going to be there. Things are going to be more turbulent.
Is it going to be there, or is it already there?
It's already there. The indications are there that market turbulence has come to stay. Yeah. Whether recession comes, goes, stays, is done away with, the point is that that has to be factored. There was a context where, as I said, we were discussing earlier, that equilibrium was the right state to be in. In today's world, dynamic equilibrium is the reality. So you have to keep kind of, not only moving set of goals, but moving targets every point of time. You will have to be conversant, you have to be comfortable with the kind of ambiguity, taking decision in a state of semi-dark, if not total absence of light. So continual change, adapting, upgrading, modifying, changing every moment. It's difficult, but the point is that there's no go. If we have to kind of, leave aside thriving, but even to survive, we have to understand this basic dynamic of continual change. In this context, the skill and competency upgradation also has to be therefore attributed to this understanding of change. Your enunciation, your conceptualization and execution of competency based and skills that would be required in terms of knowledge. Knowledge has to be expansive. It cannot be now restrictive. It has to be participative, inclusive. Knowledge management tools are available, as Virender so beautifully put it in his presentation. The skills have to be kind of constantly learned, unlearned, relearned. So it's not only upskilling but reskilling at every given point of time. The attitudes and the aptitude also has to be now differently interpreted in the change of the continual change. Design thinking, the right side usage of mind, the creative process, the parallel thinking processes will have to be now engendered truly into the skill and the competency mapping that any organization will require to achieve its goal. And above all this would therefore now be the overarching values as a fourth paradigm: knowledge, skill, attitude or aptitude, and then the overarching values which will actually root you or anchor you to your basics and help you survive this brave new world of the future. So it is in this context that we need to kind of reanalyze our own.
This comes from the employee or the employer?
Both. Basically, as I said, the golden rule is that there are no golden rules. So you have to set, and in that context, you have to think out of box. I mean, people come and say that you think out of box is easy said than done. But the point is, who the hell asked you to get into the box first? That is most important.
At this point, I think we'll take 3 questions from the audience, bring it back to the panelists, and then give the panelists another round. Are there any queries to be raised? Yeah. Can we have a mic there?
Thank you for this really interesting discussion. I have a question which comes from my limited experience of working with organizational competencies. And what I often find is that in organizations, we start talking the language of competencies. For example, we say strategic ability as, one of the competencies. So sometimes, as a talent management professional, I find myself against, hitting a wall because, like you said, dynamic change, sometimes that's not what's required to get the job done. So what is the kind of balance that you strike between that, the strategic competencies that we all decide in an organization that we will sort of cascade through versus the need of the hour, which is always changing? So that's my question.
So I would say in this context, the supreme competence or overarching competence would be that agility, that nimble-footedness, that ability to adapt, upgrade, modify and change. Because the rules of the game are changing so fast. Not only the rules, but the game itself is changing. It's getting into a different orbital plane, and that's how this progressive, not only in arithmetical proportions or geometrical proportions, but organic proportion of change that is taking place. Having said that, we have to understand that this would lie at 3 levels. The kind of, confusion that probably this kind of understanding about competencies creates in our minds is the fact that agility is at 3 level, competence is at 3 level. Operational agility, there is a strategic agility, and there's a portfolio level agility. So what is happening at operational, probably there'll be kind of a proportionately less of what change or dynamic change that might be applicable, because those are the rooted anchors. There'll be more of continuity there. But at the strategic and the portfolio level, which is the larger context, enterprise-wide or globally, the point is that there has to be more and more of agility, more and more of projection into the future. Your capability to see the future before or ahead of your competition or ahead of others would be more relevant. So this dynamic nature would be better understood from, if seen in 3 levels, the portfolio level dynamism and dynamic changes that are taking place, the strategic adaptation of this reality, and the operational nuances have to be reset accordingly. It's not going to happen suddenly, but the point is that one has to work towards it, in fact, and it gives you the North Star, actually, the directional, the vector of it, not just the scalar measure of the quantity of the job that has to be done.
And to a very large extent, you're finding that employees themselves are driving. One of our research findings is that no longer is an employee coming in for a fixed role and willing to play out that role for a certain period of time. That employee is constantly looking at, I've done this, I see a career path, I have a short term, a medium term, a long term career path. And organizations that are able to assist that employee in reskilling, upskilling, in maybe core skills as well as other competencies that come with it, they seem to be the ones who are able to address attrition and hold the employees. Prashant, maybe you would like to talk at this point about the role of innovation at the organizational level as well as at the employee level. How innovation is a very vital part of this.
Yeah, I think innovation is perhaps one of the most abused word right now because we should ask which company doesn't want innovation, and perhaps the answer will come back very easily. So when you think about innovation, both at an individual level and at an organization level, I think we'll have to first start by dispelling some myths. And we did this internal exercise, and we realized when we thought of innovation, perhaps people were holding themselves back because for them innovation was something very big, like a Twitter or a Facebook or something which was more visible, tangible, something sizable. Whereas we realized the biggest challenge that we were therefore dealing with was just the understanding of the innovation itself. That innovation doesn't have to be something as big. Yeah. It's great if it is that big, but it will not perhaps start that big. So it could be incremental improvements. It could be the outside-in view or the inside-out view. To your point, who put you in the box in the first place? So instead of thinking without the box, boundaryless, whatever you want to call it. And therefore, we'd like to believe the organization's role is enabling that environment, creating those things. I think Virendra put very nicely, who put the organization structures in the first place? Right. So if you put the organization structure first and the organization behind, then obviously everything will follow like that. So for us, as examples of it, of enabling that innovation culture, we value less upon the aspect of who's saying it, but value more what is being said. And I think that takes courage, and I'll give you a small example just to kind of make that point. Being a company which deals with multiple currencies and kind of businesses in multiple countries, every company has to do hedging, forex hedging to protect our interests. We had a new CFO. He made some kind of bets on hedges, which did not work out well. And we had a junior-most person in the organization sitting in India sending an email, a long and perhaps not so polite email to our CFO sitting in Boston, saying this is why your strategy doesn't work. This is a new CFO on the job who's first obviously not happy about the fact that the hedging did not work out well, but he doesn't know how to respond to it. So he walks up to the CEO and says, how should I respond to this email? He said, separate the fact who's saying it. Just focus on the fact what is being said. Do you agree with what is being said? And he said, yes, I agree with what is being said. Then you respond to it based on what is being said, as opposed to the fact that the person who's saying it is perhaps someone at the junior most level in the organization. So that sets the tone of what you value. And when you enable that, then people start expressing themselves. So you start with first dispelling the myths, then you enable that environment as an organization level. Now if you come to the individual, see, again we have to break the belief that innovation happens only by certain people. Everybody is capable of innovation. You just have to believe in them. You see what you expect of others to see, not what they are capable of. Right. So I think then you start with them, having that expectation from them raises them. And I think that's really the way we think about it. So first you create that enabling environment, and then you expect of them, you provide them the tools and ask them what is preventing you, what is holding you back. Instead of you answering that question, ask them that question. And more often than that, you realize it is their own thinking, it is their own beliefs as opposed to lack of skill. So innovation is foundational, but you have to kind of make it come to life, not just talk about it.
Right, absolutely.
In fact, Jayashree, if you wouldn't mind, I think just taking a cue from what Prashant said about leadership, now changing the context of business, what's happened, democratization of society has also impacted organizations. Right. And therefore, leadership today is not positional leadership at the top. It means now it has to be diffused all across. So it doesn't mean that from the peon to the chairman, I mean, all have to be innovative, all have to be enterprising to actually understand this dynamic change, because the golden rule is that there aren't too many golden rules to follow right now. We have to evolve those golden rules. probably they'll never be evolved also. So you have to kind of, constantly be in the lookout for wherever the truth lies. And therefore, motivation of employees is becoming irrelevant from the fact that this is the so-called human age, and the beauty of this age is that, you're realizing it, that probably motivating the employees and managing employees is not possible. Because just ask a question to the audience. Will there be anybody here who will be like to be regulated or controlled by one other than yourself? I don't think we'll get an answer yes. Nobody would like to. So this has actually changed the whole management concept from managing to leadership, from motivation to inspiration. And in creating an inspired environment in the organization, there's very little that you and me can do. It lies within so that this inspiration can exist from without.
Right.
So it is this cultural change that probably Virendra also referred to in the maverick of that Brazilian company, that Semco Ricardo Semler that he was talking about, that whenever in doubt you interpret the rule in favor of the employee. So that kind of openness, that kind of democratization may be a very far-fetched idea, but the idea nevertheless, which is, the only one, the closer we get to it, the more solutions we'll probably get.
Sure.
So it's an attempt actually, and therefore, in the democratized environment of work culture, the competency, the gap analysis, the skills have to be interpreted and reinterpreted in this changed
So,
context.
Jayanth,
Just to add, Jayashree, I think work is slowly but surely becoming an expression of freedom for people.
That's true.
I think, and that is what organizations need to realize and create an ecosystem that nurtures that kind of a thought process. And actually, employees are able to experience that kind of a delight, that kind of a, and organizations which have been able to create that kind of a environment of freedom, there the employees are more engaged with the organization and the results are just fabulous.
I just add to the innovation a bit. I mean, not at the cost of trying to take a dig at the HR. I, as a service provider, I believe firmly that the HR is both a victim as well as a culprit. Imagine any job description written without a degree qualification in this world. I want to engage a salesman, but I want a graduate to sell cigarettes. What kind of a job description is this? We actually start from that, and we talk a lot about JD and the practices and the processes, the internationalization of all that. Beautiful. But why do you need? You're a victim, and because of that, you're a victim. Yes. So you want a graduate who actually goes out in the market and sells cigarettes from pawn shop to pawn shop to pawn shop. Why? Because somebody said if you're an English-speaking salesman, the pawn shop guy will actually respond better and increase your market share. I don't understand this. And I've been breaking, we as a system of people from NSDC have been breaking with the heads with the organization saying, why do you want this kind of a job profile?
But
Can't you redefine this in skills? I want a guy who knows, smart guy who knows a little bit of arithmetic and actually goes and sells one cigarette packet is 10 rupees, your buying price is 9 rupees 50 paisa, that's it, 50 paisa, if a profit I take and move.
But Shashi, while I don't hold the brief for the HR fraternity, but the point is that this is what we're talking about, we are victims of frameworks that we have given to ourselves. Absolutely. We have to look beyond these frameworks in the changing context. Look at Lehman Brothers. Did not they know the difference between prime and subprime? It was just, counterintuitive to think otherwise. Yeah. But the point is that they did not, because they were victims of their old frameworks. They thought it was always going to be northwards. The whole business context has changed and then it lies. So the organization constructs the systems, the processes, the people. And then probably I think, Jayashree, we have the other session on continually learning environment after our discussion. I think that's going to be really very relevant in this context.
I think both the best of one last slide.
have a question.
I'll come to the question. That's what I'm saying. The HR, the fraternity, they are no longer functional heads. They're actually CEOs. If that's the mindset and the hat you wear in your innovation thinking, these things can only go through an organization unless it has an approval of a CEO. Unless you behave as a CEO.
You have to. Because
and if you start looking at a functional head of mapping competencies and writing one piece of 5 Excel sheets and 4, it's not going to move.
No, the HR role probably, Shashi, is changed because it's fourfold role, as I say. It's like analyst to business. You have to be an intervention specialist. You have to be a change manager, and you have to be an evaluator, all four together. Not one at the cost of the other.
The change is not palpable.
Maybe. No. It's understood at least. In fact,
we have a question there.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question. I'm Jyotsna Bhatnagar from MDI Gurgaon, and I teach talent management in the last 10 years, talent management and competency framework. And I wanted to say to the segmentation that you're doing, Infosys, Mohandas Pai did that. A line manager moved from the finance job to the HR job there, where they did the talent segmentation, and they said, no, we don't need overqualified engineers to sell at the base level, and they changed that, and they found that the retention was happening there. So there is some movement which is happening in India itself.
Absolutely.
We don't look outside, we're seeing India. And then responding to what I think from Jindal Steel has said that, I'm sorry I don't get the name, managing self is the first thing that is there, managing self. And Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. And of course, HR managers follow that. Changing role of HR, there's another one, which is the guerrilla warfare role of HR. You see, where is how you poach, where is the talent spotting, identification, and how you get the person to your side and then retain the person. So there is a challenge there, a very live challenge. And responding to Mr. Bhatnagar,
I think we have another question
Just
there.
quickly, competency for innovation, it's moving to potential to innovation.
Yeah.
I think
Let's
that's-
take this as last question.
Ma'am, I've got a small question. Have you thought about the contractual manpower? Now, most of the companies have started going in for large amount of contractual manpower because it is cheaper. And with the change environment in the business, if for any I'm going southwards, the first person who loses his job is a contract person. I have spent some amount of money in upgrading his skills, etc., which I have kept. But he's the first person I throw out. Second is, what does he do when he goes out? Now he's without a job, he's sitting, he's skilled up. And when the change scenario takes place, when the business again starts going north, whom do I take? I don't take this guy back, because by then he has spent 2, 3, 4 years and he's crossed 30. So I am again looking for a person who's 22, 24 who can stand for 8 hours on the shop floor and work for me. Because 30, 33, 4 guys has, firstly, his physical health is there, and second, his commitments to the family have increased by then.
Yeah, would you?
I think it's a very, very important point you've raised, and the entire industry needs to shoulder the blame for this kind of thing happening. You know, we find very, very convenient alternatives, and therefore we resort to such outsourced or contractual manpower, primarily to keep the wage bill down. I mean, that's the main driver to my understanding, and keep the flexi, onboarding model in place, But very clearly, these people do not get dignity, they don't get paid well, their annual increase is just to take care of minimum wages. So actually, we are just parking the problem, and this is escapism. For corporate India, I mean, let me use a harsh word, there's nothing but escapism. You look at what kind of dignity, I mean, they do not have any dignity, the kind of, the kind of lives they lead, if you look at our overall workforce in the country today, I have 48 crore people that I talked about. 93% of them are in the unorganized and informal sectors, And this is a very, very large, and nowhere in the world, the percentage of manpower in unorganized and informal sectors as huge as this, And this is in India, therefore we keep talking about there are two countries within one, not one India. One India which is so intellectually evolved, so well paid, so bright and intelligent that they can rub shoulders with the best in the world. And this other India where people don't even know where the next meal is going to come from. I think we are all collectively in the industry responsible for this kind of a problem, and without thinking anything about this category of people who are very, very important. They're bringing a lot of value on the table. We are all, each person who is resorting to these practices is to be blamed, to my mind. I can understand some temporary apprentices and things like that, but eventually they also need to be absorbed in the organization. Otherwise, we'll keep on. I don't think it's we'll build a country that we'll be proud of.
Can I ask the audience to hold the thought, because we are going into the next session after lunch, continuing with the same theme, and we will be talking about how to manage manage that continual learning. Thank you. I'd like to thank all my
All right,
panelists.
so with this we will wrap up the session, and I quickly request our moderator to hand over the bouquet to the panelist. Everyone please join me in thanking the panelists on stage, please. We thank all the panelists for such a wonderful session. And for moderating this session so well, I request Rajesh Khubchandani from ETH to kindly come up and thanks our moderator Jayashree on stage. Thank you so much. Well, that was a knowledgeable session indeed.